Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome back. We will continue our discussion on Marshall McLuhan's essay on the typographic man today. We have been discussing in this essay. Here in this essay he talks about the distinction between typographical resources and chirographical and oral resources. How the different kinds of ways of communication and usage of media actually are far reaching, that media is not invisible, but media is very much visible and very much has a great implication on the way our thought processes work. So, continuing our discussion, he moves to the visual world. Visual world is because writing is visual, you read, right. However, it is not completely visual to begin with, because when people start writing, they use it as a mnemonic, as a way of remembering certain concepts and ideas and certain constructions really, and the articulation comes by reading out loud, all right. So, that there is always, whenever there is a shift of media from any one particular form of communication to another form of communication, there is always, we will see in this course, there is always this crossover. So, this literate world, he says that in the literate means people who can read or write, all right, literacy. So, literate world, people tend to be more detached to the world that they live in. Now, what are the reasons for this? There are certain important reasons why this happens, and we shall see why that happens. So, when people started writing, when either in writing or in printed world, he says the words lost their magic. When he says words lost their magic, means the utterance. Imagine the kind of mantras that there could be in the Vedas, or certain rituals, not only in within the Indian or South Asian context, even across the world. Litany is a very important ritualistic practice, and you have across the world in various tribal communities, various communities, we can find that the utterance of a certain word, the repetition of a certain word has a certain magic associated with it, and that is something that is lost slowly, gradually, not in a day, but slowly, gradually, as human beings shifted more towards writing, all right. So, the words lost their magic, they lose a personal element. There are certain so when I am saying something, the same text, this is a text written by Marshall McLuhan. You are of course not listening to Marshall McLuhan. I would suggest that you might want to look up some videos of by Marshall McLuhan on the internet and listen to him also, but at the moment you are listening to me. It is a little bit of a problem, because you are listening to me across this camera, not in person. If we were listening to me in person, that would have been a much more overwhelming sort of experience. My own personality would have impressed upon you a lot more than this particular screen. But here at least you are able to listen to my voice, and even on a two-dimensional space you are able to see me. So, this is a personal take on Marshall McLuhan's essay, right. So, therefore, the presence of the creator, the speaker, the writer is very important. element of a non-literate world. Whereas, in a literate world, when I write something down, after having written it, that piece of paper sort of can move anywhere without me being present. So, that kind of personal element may be lost. We will explore this particular element, particular issue a lot more in this course later on. These are early lectures where I am trying to sort of introduce some of the problematics, some of the issues related to this change of different media. And they lose in some sense the emotional overtones. Now, imagine when I am speaking with a certain tonality, I am saying something, you can understand a certain emotional level. This is not very emotional talk, but suppose we were we had a much more it was more of a deliberative sort of situation, where one is actually arguing a case, then one can get a lot more emotional. Now, that emotion does not get carried across only through the words that are used, they are also carried across through the tonality of expression. So, that element is somewhere lost in the written word. So, that is something. So, there is a clear distinction between the written world and the spoken word. Now, he says that in writing, so when you move to manuscript culture, in writing there is a split between the tongue and the heart. Now, you may have heard this term called learn by heart. So, these are vestiges of earlier practices, where learning by heart means you are not learning from learning in order to read, right. You internalize it, you internalize something and you speak as if from within, right. So, the speech actually emanates from me, whereas when I am reading from a text, the speech emanates from that piece of paper and not from the heart. So, there is a split when you say tongue and the heart, there is a split between the speech and the and whatever the inner being is. So, okay, let us not talk biology here, these are conceptual sort of domains. And so, when we are speaking from the heart, it is as if there is no distinction. So in an oral universe, I am saying what I have internalized, but in a written world, I may be saying something which I have actually not internalized, which I am reading out from a piece of paper. So, the existence of that thought is outside of me, whereas in an oral universe, that thought exists in me, all right. So, literacy says that deprives language of its multi-dimensional space. So, what happens is that when we write something down, it gets fixed in a certain sort of way, and this point is related to the earlier point of the distinction between the oral and the chirographic world, where Socrates, Cicero had reproved Socrates for making a split between the mind and the heart. And Socrates, as a person, as a historical figure, he actually stood between this border between the oral and the visual world. And Plato also was regarded by some of the people in the Middle Ages as a mere scribe, as someone who is just noting down what his teacher has had to say. So, and the argument is that the Christian Lord, the Bible as it is, that it was orally given, the teachings of the Christian God was orally given, and if it was written down, then it would not allow that interplay of minds, that multiplicity would not be there. So, there were there was a lot of in this movement, and it was a slow movement, We in today's world we see the movement from the print to the digital as a very fast paced movement. Everything that has happened within the pace of 20-30 years. We have not seen the end of it, but it is not like the movement from the oral to the chirographic world, which may have happened actually over a period of 500 to 1000 years. So, there is a lot of give and take, lot of interplay that is happening there, lot of anxieties as to what this change of medium is going to bring about. Similar anxieties could exist for today as well. All right. So, one of the things that Plato was anxious about was that that writing would create forgetfulness, that internalization, that learning by heart, the knowing something by heart, knowing from something from within, or speaking about something that comes from within is going to go away, because whenever I want to write something, I want to say something, I will write it down. After that, I will just read from the paper. That knowledge exists outside me. So, people will stop using their memories, and this loss of memory will lead to a loss of truth. These were the anxieties of this movement from the oral to the chirographic world. We are going to move to, after this, we are going to move to an essay by Walter Wrong, in which this theme will be explored a lot more. All right. So, for the moment, what McLuhan says is that there was a anxiety during this movement from the oral to the chirographic world, that writing would create forgetfulness. Memory was looked upon as a very important resource, just to sort of cross refer it to the present day. I mean, today we do not think of memory at all as important. I mean, certainly we will think of memory as much lesser important than a oral universe. Today when we talk about memory, the first thing that comes to our mind is physical memory in the form of a detachable drive, maybe a pen drive or a hard drive, right. We talk in terms of gigabytes or terabytes rather than talk about the memory in the mind. We do not try to remember things, we just straight away when we have to find something out, we head to a screen and we try to look up on a search engine. So, we have moved, human life has moved very much forward. So, but if we get that capability today of trying to imagine ourselves in a period where mostly the practice of communication was oral, then we would try to understand that the coming of writing brings in this anxiety, that if I am writing everything down, I do not need to remember things, and if I do not remember things, then I am not going to be speaking from within me, and therefore, there will be a loss of truth, because that truth, whatever speech that I am uttering, that speech is not going to be identified with me, rather than it would be identified with an external entity, right. So, that is something that we need to note. And very importantly, mythology, we have if we as students of literature sort of link these technological shifts in media of communication and map it with the various kinds of literary forms that were prevalent, then mythologies, myth making is a characteristic of oral culture, because in mythology the way it operates is that it moves from story to story. It actually links various stories. We will see what Wong has to say about Homer. And so, mythology is a characteristic of oral culture, where the narrative is not fixed. The narrative is can move, can meander between various stories. You can tell the story of a mythological character through by including stories A, B, C, D, or you can tell that story through A, X, Y, and U. There could be various stories that could be woven together to form a myth, and the exact telling of the myth is dependent on the person who is telling it, whose truth it is, because they are speaking from within and not from a written document or text. All right. I hope you have been able to gather some bits of this thought. If at any point of time you find that you need greater clarity, it would be a good exercise to go back to the text and read it, or just note those issues, just note those issues which can be raised on the forum, and you will find clarifications on it, or you can also wait for the future lectures in which some of these ideas will be revisited through other essays that we are going to look at, more specific essays. All right. So, literacy deprives language of this multidimensional resonance, that is, when a certain idea is discussed in the oral domain, is communicated in the oral domain, the personality of the teller gets intrinsically linked with the speech, right, and therefore, there could be as many viewpoints on a certain matter as there are speakers. Whereas, the moment a certain discourse is written down in a physical form, that form actually becomes static, unidimensional. All right. Manuscript, speaking about manuscript culture, he says that in this long period between 15th century BC to the 15th century AD, that's really 3000 years he is talking about the existence of manuscript culture, or the coming into being of manuscript culture, as manuscript culture really gradually took over and became the predominant form over a period of about 3000 years. He says that the visual did not become dissociated with tactility, that it is, the sense is that you are, when you are reading something, it is not merely that you are you're not using any of the other sensory organs, because reading always meant for a long period of time till the end of the manuscript culture, reading meant reading aloud. You could not read, people did not read silently, they would read aloud, and it is only the sound that is produced in the reading aloud that would create the meaning for the person who is reading it. All right. So, even if I were to read something as a medieval sort of priest or a scholar, I would read it, even if I am reading it for myself, I would read it aloud, because the sound would make that sense. In fact, some of us, I am not sure if your generation would really be able to appreciate this, but at least when I was a child, when I had to learn something up, I would be asked by my parents or my teachers to read it aloud. It is only by reading aloud that you will memorize it. So, somewhere those traditions of the oral culture were coming in, where to learn something by heart you needed the sound to go in through the ears, all right, and therefore, to get it internalized. These are practices through which the human body gets accustomed to certain forms of communication media, and so the incantation. So, this there are various kinds of oral cultures which got transferred slowly to through to the chirographic or the manuscript culture. The cultures of meditation, prayer, study, and each incantation, when it happened, it in the memory, it was not a visual memory, all right, to begin with. Even in the manuscript era, people were not reading the word tree, T-R-E-E, as tree, but the sound of tree, and associating the sound of tree to the physical object, which is the tree. All right. So, it was not a visual memory, it was more of a oral memory. So, people in oral cultures would often be bewildered by literate people, ask, why do you write things down, can't you remember? So, I am saying something, I need to note it down. I mean, I am saying this, can you not remember? Because in oral cultures, the work of memory is a lot more. Memory has a much greater emphasis, whereas and it is something that the brain gets organized. This is something that Ong is going to talk about, that actually with the change of medium or communication practices, there are actually physical changes that take place. The brain gets oriented very differently. The human brain structurally also undergoes a certain change, which is why people in the literate world are unable to substitute that space for of which have now been lost to memory. Okay? And now the human brain does other things other than just use it for memory. Earlier, a person's learning would be learning would be understood or be noted if a person has so many texts by heart, right. I mean, he can utter Milton's Paradise Lost verbatim, you know, that's great learning. However, today's day and age, we have a person whose understanding of Paradise Lost is superior to another person. We do not need to remember the text, because to access the text you just have to open the book and refer to the lines, right. So, the memory is not required. The task, that space which the brain space which was dedicated to memory in oral cultures have now been dedicated to other mental practices. All right. Now, you know, there are other aspects which he talks about. You know, formal criticism was not necessary in an oral world, because the audience would immediately be there to react, whereas formal criticism becomes part of a practice only when the text gets dissociated with the speaker. I speak something and you listen to it, you are right there and you react to it. Whereas, if I write something down and when you are reading it, I am not there, therefore, I will write a critique, you will write a critique of what I have written. So, that is where formal criticism becomes necessary. All right. In an oral universe, there would be, language was much more fluid. There were the strictness of the rules of grammar were not so much there, simply because, you know, between you and me, as I said in a previous lecture, that language actually exists between the interhuman space, between the speaker and the hearer, the listener, right, the interlocutor. So, as long as we are able to communicate with each other, the rules of grammar do not matter, right. Rules of grammar become important when a particular text travels to a place where the speaker is no longer there, and speaker is not part of that context, speaker is not part of that domain. So, imagine a situation where I am lecturing and I am lecturing in a remote place, or a very different geographical location, where the language works very differently. In order to communicate there, I will first have to understand the local linguistic practices in order to be able to communicate. So, you see, in ancient times, when there were cases where scholars would travel from place to place learning things, they would go to a certain place and live there, spend a lot more time there, unlike modern professors or you know, scholars who would fly down for a conference and fly back in 2 days across the globe. That would not be the case, isn't it? So, they would go there, and so these ancient scholars would travel great distances, often by foot and by other means, which would take great time. And once there, they would spend a lot of time, maybe several years there, first trying to imbibe and understand the culture that is there, and then communicate with them, all right. But when written texts sort of come into being, it is not the scholar, not required that the scholar actually moves from one place to another in order to make that communication possible. What is traveling is the text, is the written document that has been produced. Now, so therefore, for someone to be able to understand it, you need some common language, and that common one of the ways in which that common language is created is stricter rules of grammar, so that everybody understands exactly or tries to be as exact as possible in capturing the meaning of what is written. All right. Okay. You know, and today's day and age, you know, we talk about the age of copyright, and that it is looked upon, copyright is looked upon as a very sacrosanct sort of legal practice, and it is looked upon as something that cannot be violated at all. But really speaking, there was a certain point of time, certainly in the oral universe, copyright was did not exist at all. In fact, in this course we will look at copyright as a concept that develops along with print very closely, and it is closely associated with the history of print, but more about that in a later lecture. But as of now, what McLuhan is saying, that it would have been meritorious actually to circulate another person's book, you know, in a chirographic universe, because you see, you know, the idea is that you try to communicate more and more with the audience that is there. You are trying to spread the domain of ideas, because a person's worth was not located in the book itself. The person's worth was located in his or her presence rather than in the book. So, when I am speaking of, or I am teaching teaching about McLuhan's essay, the iota of the most important thing about this thing is what I am saying rather than only what McLuhan is saying, right. If McLuhan were to articulate it himself, he would surely have done it very differently, because I am here interested in the larger span, larger series of lectures that we are going to undertake to understand the digital media. That was not McLuhan's objective. All right. So, if I can give you one alternate example, you know, there are many singers in our country, and certain songs are sort of associated with those particular singers, right. So, they could have a Lata Mangeshkar or a Mohammad Rafi, and there are other singers who actually sings Mohammad Rafi's songs or Lata Mangeshkar's songs, right. But that does not take away that resonance, that voice is not recreated. It is created only by that particular singer who is singing out there. So, when I am there in person, there is no way that I can be replaced, all right, good or bad. If a speaker is not good, that speaker also cannot be replicated by another person, whereas a book can be reprinted. You can go and do a photocopy of the book, but you cannot do a photocopy of the voice, all right. At least not in conventional technology. We do not know what the future holds, but in conventional technology that could not be done. So, therefore, you know, if someone's ideas are getting articulated through a third person or through another communicator, it is not the same as this person's, the originating person's ideas getting communicated, because it gets mixed with the other person's articulation, right. So, ideas of copyright were did not develop in the oral universe at all right. And towards the end of the manuscript culture, you had teaching through dictation, you know, because as I said, by the 13th or 14th centuries, the rise of universities in Europe meant that there was a lot more emphasis on secular learning. Before that, you had more ecclesiastical or religious learning. Now, slowly education is getting outside the domain of the ecclesiastical, and moment it is moving outside the domain of the ecclesiastic into the secular, there are a lot more interest in people trying to learn, participate in the learning process. And when the people, more and more people are getting attracted to the learning process, there are more and more students in the university towns, they get a need for books. Teaching through dictation becomes an important important resource, because you didn't have printing hadn't yet been invented. So therefore, people would note down thoughts, and those books will get then those manuscripts will then get passed on and replicated, and that was the exercise that was taking place at that point of time. So in this particular essay, McLuhan really is talking about how this movement from the oral to the chirographic world, to a manuscript or even a printed world, the universe, creates a different kind of human practice, a different kind of human way of communication, and it changes the way human beings actually relate to each other and relate to ideas and relate to communication. It is not merely a change of medium. The change of medium is important for us to note. Thank you so much.